Let's be brutally honest right now. That's a big question.
I'm looking for someone who doesn't want to go to base camp, but they want to go to the very top.
Whether it's here, India, New York.
Civilization was born at happy hour.
That's what wins. That's what stands out. That's what people are interested in. That's what I want to know. The Hospopreneurs Podcast with James Henderson. Hello and welcome to episode 136 of the Hospopreneurs Podcast. Susannah George is the award-winning CEO and founder of Urban List, Australia and New Zealand's largest independent lifestyle publisher. Identifying a gap in the Australian market for an independently curated city guide, Susannah built the brand from her bedroom in 2011 and has since established a platform with over 3 million visitors every month. 10 years later, her dedication to digital publishing has led her to be recognised with several accolades and collaborate with brands like Mercedes Benz, Bank Australia, Intrepid and Rolling Stone. Today's episode is sponsored by Access Collins, your one-stop shop for inquiries, reservations and events. For full visibility and control over your bookings and inquiries in one central place, check them out at theaccessgroup.com.au. Let's get into the episode. Hello and welcome to the show, Susannah.
Hey James, thanks so much. What a way to start the day.
Absolutely. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the program. I'm really excited to ask you not just about Urban Lists, but about your background prior to starting the business. And normally I like to ask the question of why you do what you do or a crazy hospitality story. So I'm actually going to start with the crazy story and then move into why you do what you do, get it lateral and then into what. So if you could please tell me the story you've brought to the program, a crazy hospitality story.
Firstly, love this way of starting the podcast. I had thought about this question coming in. The first thing that came to mind for me is a little bit of both. So kind of a cocktail, one shot memorable, one shot crazy. Essential background to the story is that I'm married to probably the most charismatic, people magnetic person that you've ever met. So her name's Prue. And whenever we travel, we either go really high or really low, never in between. So either full locks or agriturismo where maybe you have matching sheets. So that's background for this story. So we, on one particular day on our honeymoon, we were in Piedmont and we had a booking at a restaurant that was about an hour, 40 minutes away from this little B&B. And we had spent the afternoon in that B&B basically drinking Nebbiolo. And this was not the sort of restaurant that you really roll into after an afternoon on the wine. So
it's already sounding like a good holiday.
Yeah, It was a good holiday. So side note, recommendation from David Pryor, who is someone you should absolutely have on this show. So I don't know if you know him, but he is a magnificent travel and food writer. So we had this restaurant booking. It was memorable from the second that we arrived. So the restaurant itself was buried in the countryside just outside Turin. Essentially was like an art installation created just adjacent to this old walled city. So one of the walls of the restaurant was actually this walled city. And then the rest of the restaurant, it felt like a suspended glass box on a hillside. So intensely modern. The glass was gradient tinted from this sort of amber hue through to fuchsia. And throughout the space, it was really sparsely decorated. So these egg-shaped tables that were enormous, totally overwhelming, overbearing, no matter your group size. And there was just two of us. So particularly so, kind of ahead of its time, I guess, in these inter-COVID years, it was well and truly abiding by that 4 square meter rule. So the two of us sat down at this enormous table and the courses commenced. And it was full molecular gastronomy, which is not usually how we eat when we're traveling. We're kind of more of the bistecca traveler when we're in Italy. But these courses just kept getting more and more wild when they were coming through. And at one point, it must have been a palate cleanser, but literally a helium balloon that was remote controlled came floating through the restaurant to our table, and it had attached to it sherbet and Campari. So wild. Sounds like I'm making it up. I swear it happened. And so this happened, and Prue was a smoker at the time, so she ducked outside to have a cigarette. And the next thing that I know, we're actually having our dessert courses back of house in the kitchen with all of the chefs. So she's befriended the executive chef outside, and we've gone from this incredibly highfalutin experience to being back of house in the kitchen with the chefs at this basically a card table having our dessert courses, watching the World Cup, screaming at the TV, drinking a million Americanos, and ended the night with kick-ons at the executive chef's Nonna's house. So bizarre, crazy, very memorable.
That's a great story. Thank you very much for sharing that. Susannah, I noticed in your description there, you're very visual as well. So is that something that has driven the way that you work? It sounds like you're a visual learner and that's something that is important to you. Is that something that's really spurred you on?
You are the first person to ever flag that for me. And now I'm so intensely curious about it. I was a musician earlier in life, so creativity is absolutely part of my brain makeup. But I'd never really thought about the visual aspect. I have to think about that a little bit more.
Yeah, okay. Maybe sit on that one because, yeah, it sounds like because you were very detailed in the way you described that, and I'm wondering whether that's how you learn as well. I'm going to move on to another question. So another question that is why you do what you do. Get it abstract, get it broad, wide. There's all sorts of words I use to describe that one. So why you do what you do. What is it that really fundamentally drives you to get out of bed and create what you do every day?
So why I do what I do is it's linked to what Urban List does, but I do see myself as a separate entity. I think some founders may not. I'm almost 10 years into this journey, so I've found the space now to create a little bit of separation. And realistically, I am fueled by possibility. I get out of bed every day and I work as hard as I do because I'm simply excited by what could be. And I use that word possibility quite deliberately. Earlier in my life, I would have said opportunity. And I've come to learn that opportunity can be double-edged. It assumes that the other party to the conversation also identifies as an opportunity. So I'm trying to take the labels off that, trying to take the pressure off that and make it about possibility. So I love the idea of what could be for our team, for our audience, for our clients, for this conversation, for my future, for our future, for my family. I am obsessed by the possibilities that we're creating at Urban List. These are, fortunately, possibilities that are actually becoming opportunities. And that's all committed to providing the content, the context for people to really lean in and make it so for themselves. So much energy and so much of my drive and so much, I guess, grit comes from the core reasons I started the business. I wanted to provide a really scalable solution to help small businesses harness the power of the internet and drive traffic through their doors. So I'm a fifth generation entrepreneur, really passionate about the contribution that small businesses make to our culture, particularly to Australian culture. It's one of the things that I think sets Australian culture apart. And so I was really passionate about how they could leverage the internet to their best advantage. And also on a more sort of consumer angle, I really wanted to make it easier for people to find and do more of what they love. I thought that if it was easier to find more of what they love, they'd be more likely to do it. And that was incredibly important when it came to supporting local. And I also think that doing more of what you love makes you happier. And that's important because happier people are more active, more engaged, and way more capable of making the change that I believe is really necessary in the world.
Thank you for smoothly segueing from why into what you do. There's a lot there that I kind of want to pull apart. Firstly, though, what is it really about possibility that really inspires you? Is it something there that is deeper than that? Because opportunity versus possibility, some may say that it's semantics between the two, but what is it that then has made you choose to use possibility instead?
Possibility has become the focus of my vernacular because it's less centered on the need for an outcome every time. And therefore, I believe it more conducive to creativity, more conducive to collaboration, more conducive to innovation, and ultimately probably a happier me. opportunity for me comes somewhat weighted. It's linked to words like opportunity cost. If you don't leap, what will it cost you? If you don't make the most of this opportunity, what will that implication be? Who else, therefore, might take up the mantle? Whereas possibility, I think, creates more space for blue sky thinking and doesn't really force you to cut and cull ideas that may be really worthy. They may just take somebody else's expertise and somebody else's builds to really make the magic.
Thank you for elaborating on that one for us, Susannah. I'd like to know a little bit more about how UrbanList came to be. So what was it that you were doing beforehand, just to sort of catch listeners up on what UrbanList is and how you came to find that opportunity?
So the story of UrbanList, like every founder, is inextricably caught up in how I was choosing to live my life. So I graduated from university. I actually studied 5 different things before graduating, by the way.
Why was that? Because it sounds like you're a creative mind. You would have jumped around to a lot of different things. You said you studied music, and then the way that you answered my comment on you being a visual thinker as well, it sounds like you're very reflective and introspective. I imagine that that's probably what caused you to get confused about what to actually study. But that's just my own theory there.
Yeah. So I think there are a few factors in terms of like why I leapt around my degrees so often. I think that the first one is probably societal, in that I find it really unusual, and it's somewhat unique to the Australian education system, perhaps even the Queensland-based education system, that we're encouraged to specialise so young. I really am such a big fan of the US or the UK approach, where essentially every undergraduate does a liberal arts degree and you have the scope to explore what it is that truly interests you rather than being pushed down this specialization path so early. Coupled with that, I was a violinist in my former life. I started playing the violin when I was 4. I think I was practicing about 4 hours a day by the time I was 8. It was a huge part of my life. And I actually did grade 11 and 12 over 3 years because I was spending a chunk of time in the US studying over there. So I knew at 17 that it wasn't to be my career. It was something that I happened to be good at, but it wasn't my real love. But I never like to say, what if? So essentially, the first of my degrees that I enrolled in was in music, and I gave it 6 months to practice as hard as I possibly could. I think I slept 4 hours a day to really give it a go and see how good I could possibly get before I closed the case and never got the violin out again. So that was the first degree. And from there, I bounced around. I bounced to science, to business law, to graphic design. So there is visual in my background. Didn't finish that one though. And then I finally found a degree called mass communication. And that was a degree that allowed for a major to come from the business faculty and a major to come from the creative industry. So it really blended those two aspects of my personality, my passion, my brain. Finally finished that one. So I think I bounced because I'd been so focused on one thing for so long, I truly didn't know who I was without that thing.
But then that thing wasn't quite right because you ended up doing something yourself as well. What sort of led you to that?
There's true irony, I guess, in the fact that the degree that I studied could not have better prepared me for what I ended up doing, but there was a big hiatus in between. So I graduated university, moved straight to Paris before graduation day with the not so simple goals of A, learning the language, and B, securing a job in communications in the luxury goods industry. That makes no sense now at my age, but of course at 22, why not? Why wouldn't this happen for me? So I moved to Paris. After 3 years there, I realized I did actually eventually secure a job, but I realized that if I wanted to work in communications and if I really wanted to work my way up in the industry, I'd best be living and working in a place that spoke English. So I started applying for roles in the US, and I didn't really mind whether I landed on the East Coast or the West Coast, just didn't want to be in the middle. And the very best role that I was offered was in Los Angeles, and it was with a publisher and trade show producer called Advanced Star Communication. I was in a corporate comms role there, a little bit of investor relations as part of my role, but corporate comms. And I was in a really fortuitous situation where weeks before I started in that role, my would-be boss resigned to start his own company, which subsequently was featured on Inc. magazine for the fastest growing startup in the US. So well done to Mark. And then his boss resigned about 6 months into my tenure. So I found myself as a 24-year-old reporting to the CEO of a billion-dollar company. And he was absolutely inspirational, transformational in terms of my career journey. He took me under his wing and he exposed me to all sorts of things that I wouldn't have otherwise been able to experience. He really treated me almost like a fifth daughter to him. I used to spend Thanksgiving with his family. And it was such a foundational period now that I look back on it, because it was the very naissance of digital publishing. And what digital publishing looked like then was actually basically creating a PDF of the print product. In there at the ground floor, if you will, in terms of the growth of the industry. And then my next role in LA was with a consumer goods PR company who was really starting to invest in the social media space. So they identified that this was up and coming. This was long before even Facebook had business pages. It was totally consumer network, but they recognized the opportunity here. I was really fascinated about the space, and again threw myself in wholeheartedly and got some wonderful mentorship and guidance from some of the best thought leaders in that space really early in the piece. So I was working and playing in this space in around 2007, which was really long before it became mainstream in terms of the commercial world. So 2007, I am living and working in Los Angeles, and I've found myself twice in pretty quick succession living in this new big city. None of those usual sources of inspiration for things to optimize your life in the town. I don't really have this friendship group. I don't really have my go-tos in terms of my social life. And so I found myself turning to the internet to find out where to get good pizza and who does margaritas that I'm going to love and where am I going to get my hair cut, which yoga studio am I going to try. And I found myself in this warren of user-generated ratings and reviews. And I found it such an ineffective search experience trying to cross-reference the 1-star review to the 5-star review and trying to figure out which one you had more in common with. I found that to be such a frustrating issue. And on the flip side, it was astounding to me that even in a city like Los Angeles, there was, in essence, no digital product that was curating the city down to recommendations that were any good. It existed in print, but not digitally. And that started the wheels turning in my mind. If this does not exist in Los Angeles, quite possibly it doesn't exist anywhere. As I said earlier, I am a 5th-generation entrepreneur, really passionate about small business. And I was also pretty alarmed on trips home by how little use there was of the internet, of digital technologies amongst small businesses when it came to attracting and growing their customer base. I was really empathetic to this challenge that they were facing. They didn't have the resources, whether that was manpower or whether it was know-how. And I was also pretty clear that I didn't want to one by one handhold mums and dads through setting up Facebook pages. Whatever I did, I wanted to make a difference and I wanted to be at scale. So I put these two challenges, opportunities together and came up with this idea that was all about aggregating like minds through the internet so that I could channel them out to small businesses that I loved. And this for me was transformational in terms of my identity. For the first time, it felt like I'd found my new path. And it'd been a long journey to that point. So from that point, that was what I did every evening. I didn't have the courage to start this business yet, but sure as hell was going to throw every hour I had at it to see if maybe there was something here, something that could work. I pitched it to my greatest mentor, my dad, on a hike over Thanksgiving weekend. And he looked at me with one raised eyebrow, as did pretty much anyone else that I told. Didn't have the confidence to back myself at that point. I really trusted their judgment. So I enrolled in night class at the UCLA School of Entrepreneurship, whittled away until I finally had the confidence to make the move home to Australia and see if I could actually make a go of this thing. So I landed back in Australia in 2010, and 12 months later, Urban List launched from my bedroom in a tiny little workers' cottage. Launched to cricket, of course. It was me and a laptop and two very generous interns, family friends who could see what I believed.
A lot of tech companies launch in that similar way as
Yeah,
well.
not a garage, but a bedroom. Slight plot twist.
To no one as well.
To no one. And even though I was launching to no one, I remember, again, back to this visual thing, I remember having two post-it notes on my pinboard, and they were my goals for this first month of launch. And I wanted to have 900 unique visitors come to the site. And that was built on the science of how many people do I know and how many of them could I trust to tell one more person? So no science. And then the second goal that I had was that I wanted one small business owner to reach out and express interest in being featured on the platform. Wasn't about a commercial transaction. It was literally that I knew how much they would value their business, their brand. And if they wanted to align theirs with mine, then maybe there was something here. So we did hit both of those goals, and we hit them in the first 24 hours.
Great. You told the right people, obviously.
Yeah, that was my first shot in the arm that it might actually become something, and totally gave rise to one of our core values, which is what we set, we get. Because had I not had those goals, I would have never recognized that that was something worth achieving.
Yeah, if what you set is what you get, which is an interesting value there to have, do you ever not achieve that, or do you set it within bounds that is always achievable?
So what it means in our business is that we do what we say we will. So it's a commitment to one another, to our clients, to our audience. It also means that we believe that ambitious goals are going to get the best from us. So had I set goals along the way that were aligned to industry trends, I imagine we'd be about a quarter of the size that we are today. So we backed ourselves, as every startup does, to really chase that J-curve hockey stick of growth. And we did that by thinking differently and challenging ourselves that just because the first idea didn't get us to our target, we have plenty more in the bank, and it's just about continuing to test and try until we get to the goal.
You mentioned in your story there that you had a chat with your dad as someone that you really trust there as well. I'm guessing you've got other people that you have around you now, or people that you've accumulated along the way that you look to for support. Who are those sorts of people?
I'm extremely fortunate to have a wonderful network of people that I can call on in different points of time. Like most people, I don't really have a core mentor, and different people play different roles. But the constant is certainly my dad. Another constant has been an incredible Queenslander, Mark Sowerby. He's been a really instrumental source of insight, inspiration, storytelling along my own journey as well. So those are the two that I rely on the most heavily.
Fantastic. And you mentioned twice in your story as well around fifth generation entrepreneurship, that you're a fifth generation entrepreneur. I wouldn't have a clue what my great grandfather did. So it's something that your family's obviously quite proud of. So what were those things that they've done? Were they all in the same industry? Were they different industries? What did that sort of look like and then instill in you that's different to maybe other people that haven't grown up in an entrepreneurial family?
Yeah, so totally different industries. So engineering, product design. My father has a business manufacturing number plates for cars. So wildly different sectors. I guess the commonality is back to that word possibility. So what does this look like in terms of the environment that you grow up within? I remember being 5 years old, waking up on Saturday mornings, favorite day of the week, putting on my school uniform because uniforms made you official, and going to work with my dad. And I would sit in the corner of his office as he very deliberately orchestrated these meetings or phone calls so that I might learn by osmosis. And every so often he'd throw me some snacks so that I'd stay entertained. But I remember that being privy to these conversations, this thinking from a really early age. And of course, I didn't know that was part of my education. But now I do question sometimes why I know something to be so. Like, why does this intuition exists, and quite probably it's not really intuition, it's probably a learned skill that's quite simply from having been brought up around it. Dad tells similar stories. He was in his house, his dad's office was downstairs, and he was required to come and ask his dad when he would like morning tea. And his dad would make him wait for 20 minutes at the door as a little kid, quite simply so that he would absorb the meetings, the conversations that were taking place in the office so that he could learn also. So those are two stories that really ring true to me. I've got a 5-year-old. I cannot imagine him sitting quietly in the corner of the office. I really need to work on that.
Susannah, I'd like to really know, this is a question that I often ask in the shows, what you're learning about or exploring at the moment. So what is it that, I guess more personally, where are you looking as you grow moving forward now?
Learning is one of the things that I am the most passionate about. It's something that I make time for in every day. So I am actually going to a workshop with Patrick Lencioni, albeit virtually, after we finish our chat today. Are you familiar with Patrick Lencioni?
No, I'm not.
All right. He wrote The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, The Truth of Employee Engagement, incredible author, speaker, and he writes in the form of fables. We are doing this as a leadership and executive team today as a big old thank you for the massive commitment that they made through COVID. So it's core to who we are as an organization. What am I reading right now? I'm reading Shoe Dog, which is by the founder of Nike.
Founder.
Yeah, great read. Did you enjoy it?
I haven't read it. It's one on my list. My friend read it and she was like, oh my God, you got to read this book.
Yeah, really worthwhile.
Yeah. But you're finding it good?
I love it. Absolutely love it. And then the other ones that I love, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, transformational for me, and Traction.
Oh, great book.
Great book. Really practical and very much how we operationally function as a business.
Just to elaborate for listeners, what is Traction about and what's really making you want to read that book?
Yeah, I've probably read that book 5 times, and we have a book club internally, and in book club we've read it twice. So
love that.
Traction really breaks entrepreneurial success into 6 core components, and I don't want to go too deep into what they are because that's almost a spoiler for the structure of the book. But what they do is they break it into steps that are very elegant in their simplicity and very impactful in their execution. So they are very focused, certainly on the importance of vision, but more so, how do you gain day-to-day traction in moving your team to achieve that vision? So that's what it's all about. Transformational for me in my thinking. I'm not a process-driven thinker, and this has given me one that I can really get behind. And it's how we run our business.
Excellent. To flesh out this particular question a little bit more around what you're learning about or exploring, what is it that has drawn you to these books? And it's interesting that you've said that you've reread those same books. I have heard that same philosophy from a few different people before, saying that they would rather not read 100 different books, but the right book 100 times. And that's something that's ringing through in what you're saying there about just rereading the same book if it's got the right lessons in it that resonate with you. So what is it then that's leading you to read these particular books? Maybe Shoe Dog there, if there's something there. Maybe you just heard it was a great book and you wanted to read it. But what is it that's really making you want to read that? Is there something that you're looking to get out of these particular books?
So it should probably come as no surprise that I'm a big list maker, hence Urban List. And I have a list in my Evernote of book recommendations. And every time I have a conversation with somebody that steers toward learning, growth, reading, which is regularly, I'm adding tomes to that list. Pretty diverse list at this point. I keep being drawn to reread certain books because they were so transformative at a point, and I again find myself at a bit of a crossroads on the journey. And I remember the feeling of reading something that really resonated with me in that book, but I can no longer remember the detail that made it effective. So that's really what draws me back.
Do you take notes? Because I often take notes when I'm reading, and then I take notes on every book I read, even fictional books. I'm like, oh man, that was a good way to say that. Do you ever take notes on any of those books?
So I read business books on Kindle and leisure books in hard copy to try and create that distance between those two worlds. But on Kindle, I highlight.
And you can download them.
Yeah, you can download the highlights. I feel like for some reason they've deliberately made that functionality a little bit hard to access. Guess it's to do with copyright. So I do highlight. I've found note-taking to feel good in the moment, but not really translate operationally. So what we do in the context of book club is actually capture 3 key learnings that we think Urban List would benefit from if we were to implement. So that's probably the closest that I get to true note-taking.
No, cool. I like that. So 3 key learnings from every book, and then you revisit those books as well?
We do.
To find new key learnings or elaborate on them?
We revisit books because several years have passed, and so we're not all as fresh, but we remember it being transformational, or because there are new team members who aren't across what it is that we're all talking about. And that feels somewhat exclusive, so we want to bring them in the club.
Love that. Susannah, with the time that you've spent in the industry, I'm sure you've seen a lot of things change. It's been an incredible amount of change that's occurred between the time that you said there where this digital realm was essentially just PDFs of the print publication to now where social media is just a thing that everyone uses, right? What have you seen that's really changed in the industry that's totally flipped a lot of the things that you have been doing or were doing at the time that have made you change tact or helped you to grow?
It's almost impossible for me to identify anything that's the same as when I started the business. Perhaps this universal truth that we're all looking for more of what we love, that's the same. The way that we bring that to life for people has really shifted a lot over this almost 10-year journey. So we started at a time where there was no such thing as scheduling on social media even. So if you wanted to post at 7:15 a.m. to catch the commute, you posted at 7:15 a.m. to catch the commute. So I guess one of the shifts has been that we've moved from being very focused on our .com and driving our audience there more toward sharing stories and being a brand that creates relevance and creates utility on the channels that the audience is using and existing within. So there's less of that egotistical drive to our platform and more of a focus on how do we bring relevance to this community where they are.
How then have you dealt with circumstances like where all publications were removed from Facebook temporarily there and not having that fear around your total disappearance from these platforms? A lot of what people talk about is scrambling to get their viewers from these social platforms onto their .com or their email database. So why do you not mind about that?
Urban List was actually much less impacted than you might imagine when the Facebook news ban came to play for that week. And the reason for that was that we had spent 5 years previous diversifying our audience strategy. So this was not actually a huge surprise that this happened. We acted as though it was surprising, but it was a real possibility for at least 6 months previous. So we were very well prepared. To provide context, Urban List serves between 11 and 12 million page views of content every month, and only about 1 million of those page views originates with Facebook. So we weren't beholden to them by any stretch of the imagination. That said, what was more worrying to me was the downstream impact on the hospitality sector, on the arts sector, on culture of our cities. Because what does happen on social media is that our content is shared very prolifically. And it's often that shareability that's actually driving the foot traffic in venue, driving the ticket sales. So I was very concerned about the fact that Australians would no longer have the ability to share content that they valued, because I could see the direct translation into industries that really couldn't afford another blow. So I was really vocal about the lack of awareness and consideration in the drafting of the News Media Bargaining Code that brought about this Facebook situation. The lack of consideration of those small businesses, because they were they were the scapegoats. And at a time on the back of fires and a pandemic and floods that they really couldn't afford to be.
To elaborate on that experience, the hospitality experience, and then sharing posts that then drive that foot traffic, how is that, in your perspective, changing or going to change? I've had a lot of other guests who are in hospo tech or other sort of adjacent worlds there, but from a media perspective and consumer media perspective, I'm interested to know what you think is changing there, what you've seen changing, and what that experience looks like in the future.
So we're, shall we call it an inter-COVID world now? And I think that there has been quite a transformation in terms of the relationship that exists between consumers and operators, and a much greater awareness of how much we all contribute to the sector and to the experience. I think previously there may have been a little bit of an attitude amongst consumers that in the hospitality industry that they're here to serve. And I think that what happened through COVID was a recognition that it is critical for our culture that we all be part of it and that we all are party to it. My absolute favorite hospitality experiences are where everyone in that venue recognizes that they are part of that culture. When you walk into a restaurant and you just get that sense that the customers know that they're about to experience something wonderful and they're really leaning in and contributing to that vibe. There's this really buttoned up but very breezy rapport between the customers in front of house, and equally between the front and back of house. They're working together and they understand that together they're creating this moment, and that collectively that moment may well be the highlight of somebody's week. And I think that's really what the industry is all about at the end of the day. It's all about creating these moments that are moments of value, moments of magic, and moments that we want to return to week after week.
Thank you for that answer, Susannah. This is a question that I do often ask. Is your biggest challenge right now, which is a well-worn question, and what I'm really trying to get out of this one is I believe that we are as big as the challenges that we face. I often think that, and you can ask someone whose largest challenge right now is that they're trying to scale to $1 million business, and then someone else is trying to scale to a $10,000 business, and it's totally different circumstances. But I'm looking at, and this isn't necessarily on business growth, but what's your biggest challenge that you're dealing with at the moment there? What sort of friction are you not plagued by, but something that you're overcoming at the moment?
One of my weaknesses is my bias for action. And that serves you really well in startup phase because you need to wear all the hats. You are constantly leaping from one task to the next. Of course, as the business grows, your role shifts. And so each day I have this internal fight against my own bias for action and my very real need as a CEO to do the hardest thing that most people never do, which is make the time to think. So there's, I don't know who said this, someone very wise. There's a quote, the more that you can see, the more you can see is possible. What I am working on is really uncovering some of these unconscious biases, really doing battle with this bias for action and trying to unwind a whole lot of narratives that I've created for myself. Because if I can figure out which of these stories are actually serving me and which are just thoughts that even if they're not particularly destructive, they're just random perceptions, then I will be more focused on what is truly ahead. And what's truly ahead will be far more expansive. I am fascinated by ideas. I find them intense and fascinating. And for me, they come a mile a minute. But of course, if you couple that with the bias for action, it can have you firing in a lot of directions at the same time. So what I'm really working on is being more expansive in what is possible and simultaneously trying to unwind some of those narratives that might be blocking my own personal path.
I like that. And it's quite an abstract answer as well. It's something that I would probably say for an answer. Do you have something a little more practical as well, something that you're dealing with?
The greatest challenge that we have as a business now is how do we springboard from the firefighting that we've experienced over the last 12 months and really use that as fuel for our future. So we have come out of the last 12 months incredibly strong, and that is entirely due to the incredible work of our team as a whole and the vision and the leadership of our executive. I'm very clear that had we not had this team in place leading into COVID, we wouldn't be where we are today. So for context, our page views are up 40% year on year. And if you think about the urban list that you knew coming into the pandemic, dominantly about eats and events, so certainly not pandemic proof, the fact that we were able to not only maintain our relevance, but grow our relevance for our audience over the last 12 months is astonishing. So page views are up 40%. Our revenue and profitability is also up, and our team happiness is up.
That's awesome. Congrats.
Thank you. Super proud of it. I don't know if you can tell. I don't know if you can tell how ably I have these stats at my fingertips because I've watched them like a hawk over the last 12 months. Anyway, so how do we use this springboard to fuel our future? And at a macro level, the future looks like doing what we're doing, moving millions of people to live their best lives. But of course, how and where we're doing that is definitely more complex. We were all set to launch into another international market in the same month that the pandemic hit, so March last year. So right now we're sitting tight, waiting for those borders to open so we can again expand geographically. So that's something that we're working toward. And also the advertising industry has been hit very hard over the last 12 months. We have certainly increased our level of urgency around diversification of revenue. Traditionally, Urban List has been the billboard for brands and promoting others' brands and products. I am really curious to see the extent of our brand credibility, our brand relevance, and what the world could look like if we were, in fact, the product ourselves. So that's something that we're really excited about. Also, continuing our work to make sure that our platform is having a really positive, sustainable impact on people and on the planet. This is a huge part of our cultural operations, our cultural thread. You'll see it more and more overtly as we continue our own cultural and social and environmental sustainability journey. And we're really optimistic about the opportunities that represents, both in terms of the audience impact that we can have, the impact on the planet, and also how we can really amplify the dialogue of the brands who are doing the right thing in this space.
Fantastic. Susannah, I just have one last question for you on the show today, and that's who would you like to hear on the show?
All right. I don't know your full list of guests. However, I'm going to go to something really timely. I'm going to say Matt Wiley and Maureen Tazzini. They just opened the world's first waste-free bar and restaurant in Sydney. And I would really love to hear the story of how they came to open that venue.
I think they might have even been pitched to me. I'll have to go back through my emails there. But thank you for putting them forward, Susannah. I'll investigate that. Thank you for joining me on the program. It's been a pleasure having you on. Really interesting and insightful. What a journey that you've had there. Everything starting from the crazy story that you told there, sitting at the chef's table, through to the challenges that you have faced through COVID and now moving forward. So thank you and good luck. Congratulations on the work that you've done through COVID. And I'm excited to stay in touch and see how things develop for Urban List moving forward.
Thank you so much, James, and thanks so much for the steer. You're a really masterful host, and I hope there's something that's useful.
Thank you very much, Susannah.
Have a great day.
This program is hosted by James Henderson, with technical production by Jake Olver. Voiceovers were by Angus Brennan and Shim Phelan. Thanks to our distribution team, and a special thanks to you for tuning in every week. This program was produced by H Media. We'll see you soon.